Detective Chief Robert Chen had been dreaming of this moment for 3 years. After working his way up through the ranks of the city police department, he finally had enough saved up to buy his dream home in Willowbrook Estates. The gated community was everything he'd hoped for: perfectly manicured lawns, tree-lined streets, and the kind of neighborhood where kids could ride bikes safely. The moving truck pulled away on that sunny Saturday morning in March, leaving Robert standing in front of his new 2-story colonial home. He felt proud as he looked at his black Ford F-150 Raptor sitting in the driveway. It had taken him 5 years of overtime shifts and careful budgeting to afford the $60,000 truck. Every payment had been worth it. The truck wasn't just transportation, it was a symbol of how far he'd come from his days as a rookie cop. Eating ramen noodles for dinner, Robert was still unpacking boxes when his doorbell rang at exactly 3:47 p.m. He opened the door to find a woman in her late 50s standing on his porch. She wore a crisp white blouse, navy blue slacks, and had her gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her expression looked like she'd just smelled something unpleasant. "Good afternoon," the woman said, not waiting for Robert to respond. "I'm Patricia Wellington, president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. I need to discuss your vehicle situation." Robert glanced back at his truck, confused. "Vehicle situation? I'm sorry, I don't understand." Patricia pulled out a clipboard and flipped through several pages. "Your truck is in clear violation of our community standards. Section 4.2 of the HOA covenant states that all vehicles must maintain the aesthetic integrity of our neighborhood." "I read through all the HOA documents before I bought the house," Robert replied politely. "My truck meets all the size requirements and it's parked completely within my driveway." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "The covenant also includes provisions for vehicles that disrupt the community's upscale atmosphere. Your truck is far too aggressive and intimidating for a family neighborhood like ours." Robert tried to keep his voice calm. After 15 years in law enforcement, he'd dealt with plenty of difficult people. "Ma'am, with all due respect, my truck is a standard pickup. It's black, it's clean, and it's legally parked on my own property." "Standard?" Patricia scoffed. "That thing looks like it belongs in a military convoy, not a respectable residential area. The other residents have already expressed concerns." "Which residents?" Robert asked. Patricia waved her hand dismissively. "That's not important. What matters is maintaining our property values and community standards. I'm giving you 72 hours to remove that eyesore from view." Robert felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his professional composure. "And if I don't?" "Then you'll face escalating fines starting at $200 per day," Patricia said, handing him an official-looking form. "This isn't negotiable, Mr." She paused, realizing she didn't know his name. "Chen, Robert Chen." Patricia wrote his name on her clipboard with sharp, aggressive strokes. "Mr. Chen, I've been managing this community for 8 years. I've seen plenty of new residents try to challenge our rules, and they always learn that compliance is much easier than fighting the system." After Patricia left, Robert sat in his kitchen reading through the violation notice. The form was professionally printed with the HOA letterhead, but the actual violation seemed completely made up. It referenced vague terms like community aesthetic standards and neighborhood harmony guidelines without any specific measurements or clear violations. That evening, Robert called his real estate agent, Lisa, who had helped him buy the house. "Lisa, did you notice anything in the HOA documents about vehicle restrictions beyond size and parking requirements?" Lisa sounded surprised. "No, nothing specific." "Why? Is there a problem?" Robert explained his encounter with Patricia. Lisa was quiet for a moment before responding. "Robert, I've sold 12 houses in Willowbrook over the past 3 years. Patricia Wellington has a reputation. She's very particular about things, but your truck should be fine according to everything I've seen. Have other residents had similar issues?" "Well," Lisa hesitated, "there have been some complaints. Nothing that ever went to legal action. But Patricia can be quite persistent when she wants someone to change something." The next morning, Robert decided to take a walk around the neighborhood to see what other vehicles were parked in driveways. As he strolled down Maple Street, he noticed plenty of variety. There was a bright red Camaro with racing stripes, a lifted Jeep Wrangler with oversized tires, several luxury SUVs, and even a classic Mustang with a loud exhaust system. His truck was actually one of the more conservative vehicles in the neighborhood. At the corner of Oak and Elm, Robert ran into his next-door neighbor, an elderly man named Frank who was watering his garden. You must be our new neighbor, Frank said with a friendly smile. I'm Frank Rodriguez. Welcome to the neighborhood. Thanks, I'm Robert. Nice to meet you. Frank gestured toward Robert's house. Beautiful truck you've got there. My grandson would love something like that. Thanks, though apparently the HOA president has some concerns about it. Frank's expression changed. You've met Patricia. Let me guess, she wants you to park it somewhere else? You've heard this before? Frank chuckled, but there wasn't much humor in it. Patricia has opinions about everything. She made the family across the street repaint their front door because she said the blue was too bright. She tried to ban barbecue grills because the smoke might bother people with allergies. Last year, she attempted to restrict the types of flowers people could plant in their own yards. Does anyone ever push back? Most people find it easier to just go along with whatever she wants. The fines add up quickly, and fighting the HOA can get expensive with legal fees. That afternoon, Robert received his second visit from Patricia. This time she brought reinforcements, a thin man in his 40s wearing a cheap suit and carrying a briefcase. Mr. Chen, this is Donald Harper, the HOA's compliance officer, Patricia announced. We're here to follow up on yesterday's violation notice. Donald stepped forward and handed Robert another form. Sir, we've documented that your vehicle remains in violation of community standards. This is your formal notice that fines will begin accruing starting tomorrow morning. Robert looked at the new paperwork. The language was even more vague than the first notice, with phrases like community disruption potential and aesthetic non-compliance factors. I'd like to attend the next HOA board meeting to discuss this, Robert said. Patricia and Donald exchanged a look. The next meeting isn't for 6 weeks, Patricia replied. And this matter isn't really suitable for board discussion. It's a clear-cut violation that needs immediate correction. According to what specific rule? Donald opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick binder. The HOA covenant provides the board with discretionary authority to maintain community standards. We don't need to cite a specific rule when the violation is obvious to any reasonable person. Robert had spent years dealing with people who tried to intimidate others with official-sounding language and fake authority. He recognized the tactic immediately. I understand your position, Robert said carefully, but I'll be keeping my truck exactly where it is until you can show me the specific rule it violates. Patricia's face flushed red. Mr. Chen, I don't think you understand how serious this is. The HOA has significant legal powers and we will use them if necessary. After they left, Robert realized he was dealing with people who were used to getting their way through intimidation and the threat of endless bureaucratic harassment. He'd seen bullies like this before, but usually from the other side as a police officer helping their victims. Now he was the target, and Patricia Wellington had no idea who she was messing with. The harassment started immediately. On Monday morning, Robert found another violation notice stuck to his front door. This time, Patricia claimed his truck was parked 3 inches over the property line. Robert got out his tape measure and confirmed the truck was perfectly within his driveway boundaries, with over 2 feet of space on each side. By Wednesday, there was another notice. Patricia had apparently measured the distance between his truck's front bumper and the sidewalk, claiming it violated some unwritten setback requirement. Robert checked with the city planning office during his lunch break and confirmed there were no such restrictions for private driveways in residential areas. Friday brought the most ridiculous violation yet. Patricia cited him for having excessive vehicle ornamentation because of his truck's side steps and bedliner. Robert looked around the neighborhood again and counted at least 15 vehicles with more modifications than his stock truck. The fines were adding up quickly. Each violation came with a $200 penalty, and Patricia was issuing them faster than Robert could contest them through the proper channels. The HOA's appeals process required written submissions, 30-day waiting periods, and fees for each review. At work, Robert tried to focus on his duties as police chief, but the situation at home was becoming a constant distraction. His assistant, Lieutenant Janet Torres, noticed he seemed stressed. Everything okay, Chief? You seem like something's bothering you. Robert considered telling her about the HOA situation, but decided against it. He didn't want his personal problems affecting the department, and he was determined to handle Patricia Wellington through proper civilian channels. The weekend brought a new escalation. Robert was washing his truck in the driveway when Patricia appeared with her camera, taking photos from multiple angles. "What are you doing?" Robert asked. "Documenting water runoff violations," Patricia replied, snapping more pictures. "The soap suds from your driveway are flowing onto the street, which violates our environmental protection guidelines." Robert looked at the tiny amount of soap residue that had mixed with the water. He'd used biodegradable car soap specifically designed to be environmentally safe. "This is ridiculous. Everyone in the neighborhood washes their cars. Not everyone uses such excessive amounts of soap," Patricia said, writing notes on her clipboard. "And not everyone has such a large, polluting vehicle that requires extra cleaning products." That evening, Robert's doorbell rang again. This time it was Frank from next door holding a casserole dish. "My wife thought you might like some dinner," Frank said. "Also, I wanted to apologize." "Apologize for what?" Frank looked uncomfortable. "Patricia came by earlier asking if your truck bothered me. I told her the truth, that it doesn't bother me at all. But she kept pushing, asking if the noise when you started up was disruptive, if it blocked my view, things like that." "What did you tell her?" "I stuck to the truth. Your truck is quieter than my neighbor's Harley, and it's never blocked anything." But she seemed determined to find something wrong with it. Robert invited Frank inside for coffee, and Frank shared more stories about Patricia's reign over the neighborhood. 3 years ago, she made the Johnsons remove their vegetable garden because she said it attracted rabbits. Last year, she tried to ban children from playing basketball in their driveways because the bouncing noise was supposedly disruptive. The family with the swimming pool got cited for having too many pool parties, and by too many, I mean more than one per month. "How does she get away with this?" "Most people just give up and move away," Frank explained. "It's easier than fighting. Patricia knows that homeowners don't want to spend thousands on legal fees over HOA disputes. She also has allies on the board who support her because they're afraid of becoming her next target." The following week, Patricia's tactics became even more aggressive. She started timing Robert's comings and goings, claiming his work schedule violated quiet hours. According to her interpretation of the rules, no resident could start their vehicle before 8 a.m. or after 9 p.m. Robert left for work at 6:30 a.m. every morning and sometimes returned home after his evening shifts at 10. Patricia began issuing violations for each occurrence, claiming his truck's engine noise disturbed the peaceful residential atmosphere. Then came the parking violations. Patricia began measuring Robert's truck position daily, looking for any excuse to issue citations. She claimed he was parked at a slight angle one day, too close to his mailbox another day, and partially blocking his own walkway on a third day. Each violation photo showed his truck parked normally in his own driveway. Robert realized Patricia was building a paper trail to make it look like he was a problem resident who couldn't follow simple rules. The constant stream of violations would eventually be used to justify more serious action. On Thursday morning, Robert found a certified letter in his mailbox. The HOA was demanding immediate payment of $1,400 in accumulated fines, plus administrative fees. The letter warned that failure to pay within 10 days would result in a lien being placed on his property. That afternoon, Patricia escalated to a new level. She organized a neighborhood safety meeting and sent flyers to every house on the block. The flyer described concerns about aggressive vehicles and residents who refused to follow community guidelines. Only 4 people showed up to Patricia's meeting, but she held it anyway in the community clubhouse. Frank attended and later told Robert what happened. "She basically spent an hour talking about your truck like it was some kind of threat to public safety," Frank reported. "She claimed large vehicles like yours were dangerous to children and that owners who ignored HOA rules probably ignored other safety regulations too." Did anyone agree with her? The Hendersons seemed sympathetic, but they're friends of Patricia's. Mrs. Kim asked specific questions about what rules were actually being broken, and Patricia got defensive. She kept talking about community standards and maintaining property values without giving any real details. The weekend brought the most outrageous violation yet. Patricia cited Robert for excessive vehicle maintenance because he'd checked his tire pressure in his driveway. According to her interpretation, vehicle maintenance could only be performed inside garages or at approved service facilities. Robert realized that Patricia wasn't just trying to make him move his truck, she was trying to force him out of the neighborhood entirely. The constant harassment and mounting fines were designed to make his life so miserable that he'd give up and sell his house. On Monday morning, Robert made a decision. He called the city attorney's office and asked about his legal options. The attorney, Michael Stevens, was familiar with HOA disputes. "Chief Chen, I have to be honest with you, these cases are frustrating," Stevens explained. "HOAs have broad authority, and the courts generally don't interfere unless there's clear evidence of discrimination or abuse of power. The challenge is proving that the violations are frivolous rather than legitimate enforcement. What would you need to see to build a case? Documentation of selective enforcement, evidence that the violations lack basis in the actual HOA covenants, proof that other residents with similar situations aren't being cited. Basically, you need to show a pattern of harassment rather than legitimate rule enforcement." Robert had been documenting everything, but he realized he needed more evidence. That evening, he drove through the neighborhood with his phone camera, recording every vehicle that had modifications, parking situations, or maintenance activities similar to what Patricia had cited him for. The results were eye-opening. Robert counted 18 vehicles that violated Patricia's interpretation of the rules, but only he was receiving citations. The evidence of selective enforcement was overwhelming, but Patricia wasn't finished. On Wednesday, Robert came home to find a tow truck in his driveway. The driver was hooking up chains to his truck's front axle. "Hey, what are you doing?" Robert shouted, running toward his truck. "Sorry, buddy," the tow truck driver said. "I got a work order from the HOA. Says this vehicle is illegally parked." Robert showed the driver his property deed and explained that the truck was parked on his own property. The driver, looking confused, called his dispatcher. After a 10-minute conversation, he unhooked Robert's truck and left. An hour later, Patricia appeared at Robert's door with Donald Harper and 2 other people Robert didn't recognize. "Mr. Chen, you interfered with lawful HOA enforcement action," Patricia announced. "This is your final warning. Either comply with our requirements or face legal action." Robert looked at the group standing on his porch and realized that Patricia had seriously overplayed her hand. Attempting to tow a vehicle from private property without the owner's consent wasn't just an HOA violation, it was theft. But Patricia Wellington still had no idea who she was dealing with. And Robert was about to reach the end of his patience. Patricia Wellington had reached her breaking point. For 3 weeks, Robert Chen had ignored her demands, contested her violations, and refused to be intimidated. In her 8 years as HOA president, no resident had ever shown such defiance. She decided it was time to teach him a lesson he'd never forget. On Saturday morning, Patricia called an emergency meeting with her inner circle. Donald Harper arrived first, followed by Bill Henderson and Carol Murphy, 2 board members who always supported Patricia's decisions without question. They met in Patricia's living room, which she'd turned into an unofficial HOA command center with filing cabinets, violation forms, and a large map of the neighborhood marked with different colored pins. "That man thinks he can make a fool out of me," Patricia fumed, pacing back and forth. "He's turned this into some kind of power struggle, and I won't tolerate it." Donald looked nervous. "Patricia, maybe we should consult with the HOA's lawyer before we do anything drastic. The attempted towing already pushed some legal boundaries. The lawyer will just tell us to file more paperwork and wait months for a court hearing," Patricia snapped. "By then, word will get out that residents can just ignore our authority. We'll lose all credibility." Bill Henderson, a retired insurance salesman who lived for neighborhood drama, leaned forward eagerly. "What did you have in mind?" Patricia stopped pacing and turned to face the group. "Sometimes people need to learn lessons the hard way. If Mr. Chen won't respect our community standards voluntarily, maybe some property damage will change his attitude." Carol Murphy shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Patricia, are you talking about vandalizing his truck? That's illegal. It's not vandalism when someone refuses to remove an eyesore that's damaging our property values," Patricia replied. "Think of it as community self-defense. Besides, he can't prove who did anything." Donald was shaking his head. "This is a bad idea. If we get caught, the HOA could face serious lawsuits. You could face criminal charges," Patricia waved dismissively. "Who's going to catch us? Chen works during the day and his neighbors mind their own business. A few scratches on his precious truck will send the message that our rules aren't optional." The meeting continued for another hour, with Patricia outlining her plan. She'd been watching Robert's schedule for weeks and knew he grocery shopped every Saturday around 11 a.m., usually returning home around noon. That would give them plenty of time to send their message and be gone before he returned. Bill and Carol eventually agreed to participate. though Carol kept expressing doubts. Donald refused outright and left the meeting early, warning Patricia that she was making a huge mistake. By 10:30 Saturday morning, Patricia had assembled her supplies, a set of keys for scratching paint, a utility knife for the tires, a bottle of paint thinner she claimed would fade the paint to a more appropriate color, and a hammer for the mirrors. She'd convinced herself that she was protecting the neighborhood from an aggressive outsider who threatened their way of life. At 11:15, Patricia watched from her window as Robert's truck pulled out of his driveway and headed toward the main road. She waited 5 more minutes to be sure he was gone, then called Bill and Carol. "It's time," she said simply. The three of them walked casually across the street, trying to look like they were just neighbors having a friendly conversation. Patricia had chosen this time because most residents were either at work, running errands, or busy with weekend activities. The street appeared empty. "Are you sure about this?" Carol whispered as they approached Robert's driveway. "It's too late for second thoughts now," Patricia replied. "Just remember, we're doing this for the good of the community." Patricia started with the keys, dragging them along the passenger side of the truck in long, deliberate scratches. The sound of metal on metal made Carol wince, but Patricia seemed to enjoy it. She worked methodically, creating deep gouges from the front bumper to the tailgate. "Your turn, Bill," Patricia said, handing him the utility knife. Bill knelt down next to the front tire, looking around nervously before pushing the blade into the sidewall. The tire deflated with a loud hissing sound. He moved to the rear tire and repeated the process. Carol reluctantly took the paint thinner and poured it over the truck's hood in a random pattern. The chemical immediately began eating through the clear coat, creating ugly white blotches across the black paint. Patricia saved the mirrors for last, using the hammer to smash both side mirrors and crack the rear window. Glass fragments scattered across the driveway, glinting in the morning sun. "There," Patricia said, breathing heavily from exertion and excitement. "Let's see him ignore our authority now." The three vandals hurried back to Patricia's house, where she poured coffee and acted as if nothing had happened. She was confident that Robert would get the message and finally comply with her demands. In her mind, she'd won a decisive victory in their battle for control of the neighborhood. What Patricia didn't know was that Frank Rodriguez had been working in his garage with the door open when the vandalism occurred. He'd watched the entire incident from across the street, too shocked at first to intervene. By the time he realized what was happening, the damage was already done. Frank also didn't know that Robert had installed a security camera system the previous week. The cameras were small and discreet, mounted under the eaves of his house and barely visible unless someone knew where to look. They'd been recording everything in high definition, with perfect views of his driveway and truck. At 12:20 p.m., Robert returned from his grocery run to find his neighborhood gathered in small groups on the sidewalk, all staring toward his house. As he turned into his driveway, he saw why. His beloved truck looked like it had been attacked by wild animals. The deep scratches along the side caught the sunlight. The slashed tires sat flat against the concrete, and paint thinner damage had turned his hood into a mottled mess of white and black splotches. Broken glass covered his driveway like deadly confetti. Robert sat in his car for a full minute staring at the destruction. $60,000 of damage, 5 years of saving and dreaming, destroyed in minutes by people who thought they were above the law. Frank approached Robert's car window. "Robert, I'm so sorry. I saw who did this. I should have stopped them, but it happened so fast." Robert got out of his car slowly, still processing what he was seeing. "You saw who did this?" "Patricia Wellington, Bill Henderson, and Carol Murphy. They spent about 10 minutes destroying your truck, then walked back to Patricia's house like nothing happened." Other neighbors began approaching, offering sympathy and expressing outrage at what had happened. Several mentioned that they'd been afraid to speak up against Patricia's tactics before, but this crossed every line of decency and legality. Mrs. Kim, the elderly Korean woman who'd questioned Patricia at the neighborhood meeting, walked over with tears in her eyes. "This is not what America should be. In my country, we had people who used fear to control others. I thought I left that behind when I came here." Robert thanked his neighbors for their concern and asked them to please give him some space. He needed to process this situation carefully, both as a victim and as a law enforcement officer. He walked around his truck, documenting the damage with his phone camera. The scratches were deep enough to reach the metal in several places. The tires would need complete replacement. The paint damage from the thinner had created permanent staining that would require professional bodywork to repair. The broken mirrors and cracked window were safety hazards that made the vehicle unsafe to drive. As Robert examined the destruction, he noticed Patricia watching from her living room window. She had a satisfied smile on her face, clearly proud of what she'd accomplished. When she saw him looking in her direction, she made a point of closing her curtains with an exaggerated flourish. That single gesture, the arrogant dismissal of his reaction to her crime, finally pushed Robert past his professional restraint. Patricia Wellington had just made the biggest mistake of her life, and she had no idea what was coming next. Robert walked back to his house and called his office. "This is Chief Chen. I need a patrol unit at my home address for a vandalism report. Also send Detective Williams and the crime scene technician. We're going to need photos and evidence collection." As he waited for his officers to arrive, Robert reviewed the security footage on his phone app. The cameras had captured everything in perfect detail. Patricia's planning conversation on her porch, the systematic destruction of his truck, and even her satisfied smile as she watched his reaction afterward. Patricia Wellington thought she'd won their battle through intimidation and criminal destruction. She had no idea that she'd just handed a police chief enough evidence to destroy her life completely. The real war was about to begin. The first patrol car arrived within 6 minutes of Robert's call. Officer Jennifer Brooks pulled into his driveway and immediately began documenting the scene with her body camera. She'd been with the department for 4 years and had worked several cases under Robert's leadership, but she had no idea this was his personal residence. "Sir, I'm Officer Brooks responding to your vandalism report. Can you walk me through what happened?" Robert stood next to his destroyed truck, speaking in the calm, professional tone he'd perfected over 15 years in law enforcement. "I left home around 11:15 this morning for grocery shopping. When I returned at approximately 12:20, I discovered this damage to my vehicle." Officer Brooks examined the scratches, slashed tires, and paint damage, taking detailed photos from multiple angles. "Do you have any idea who might have done this? Any ongoing disputes with neighbors or other issues?" "I have security camera footage of the entire incident," Robert replied. 3 individuals were involved. "I can provide you with their names and addresses." Brooks looked surprised. "You actually caught them on camera? That's great. Makes our job much easier." Detective Ray Williams arrived as Brooks was measuring the scratch marks. Williams was Robert's most experienced investigator, a 20-year veteran who'd earned his detective shield through solid police work and attention to detail. He also didn't realize whose case he was working. "Officer Brooks, what do we have here?" Williams asked, pulling out his notebook. "Extensive vandalism to this gentleman's vehicle. Deep scratches, slashed tires, chemical damage to the paint, and broken mirrors. The victim says he has video footage of the suspects." Williams turned to Robert. "Sir, I'm Detective Williams. I'll be handling this investigation. I understand you have surveillance footage?" "Yes, Detective. Multiple camera angles with clear views of the entire incident." Robert pulled out his phone and opened the security app. "I can show you the footage right now, or we can review it on a larger screen inside my house. Let's take a look on your phone first. Then we'll get the full footage for evidence." As Robert queued up the video, Detective Williams studied his face more carefully. Something seemed familiar about this victim, but he couldn't place where he might have seen him before. The security footage was even more damaging than Robert had initially realized. The cameras had captured Patricia's planning conversation on her front porch, where she could be heard discussing the vandalism plan. The actual destruction was filmed from 2 different angles, showing clear views of all 3 suspects' faces. "Detective." Williams watched in amazement as Patricia methodically scratched the truck's paint while Bill Henderson slashed the tires and Carol Murphy poured paint thinner on the hood. The audio was clear enough to capture their conversation during the vandalism. "This is incredible evidence," Williams said. "We've got premeditation, multiple suspects, and clear documentation of the entire crime. Sir, can you tell me the names of these suspects?" "Patricia Wellington, she lives at 425 Oak Street. Bill Henderson at 318 Elm Street, and Carol Murphy at 267 Pine Street. Wellington is the president of our homeowners association." Officer Brooks looked up from her report. "This was done by your HOA president?" What kind of dispute led to this? Robert briefly explained the 3 weeks of harassment, frivolous violations, and escalating intimidation tactics. As he spoke, Detective Williams's expression grew more serious. "Sir, this looks like a clear case of criminal harassment escalating to property destruction. The dollar amount of damage puts this in felony territory." Williams paused, studying Robert's face again. "I'm sorry, but you look very familiar. Have we met before?" Before Robert could answer, the crime scene technician arrived. Sarah Martinez had been with the department's forensics unit for 8 years and was known for her thorough evidence collection. She began setting up her equipment to photograph and process the scene. "Chief," Martinez called out when she saw Robert. "What are you doing here?" "Officer Brooks said this was a vandalism case." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Officer Brooks stopped writing mid-sentence and stared at Robert with wide eyes. Detective Williams's face went through a series of expressions as recognition dawned. "Chief Chen," Williams said slowly. "This is your house? Your truck?" "Yes, Detective. This is my personal residence, and that's my personal vehicle." Officer Brooks looked mortified. "Chief, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. If I'd known—" "Officer, you're handling this exactly the way you should handle any case," Robert interrupted. "I want this investigated like any other crime, with no special treatment because of who I am." Detective Williams was already pulling out his phone. "Chief, I need to call Lieutenant Torres and the district attorney's office. When criminals target a police chief's property, it could be considered intimidation of a law enforcement officer. That adds additional charges and penalties. Detective, I appreciate your concern, but I want to be clear about something. These people have no idea who I am or what I do for a living. This wasn't an attack on a police officer, it was the criminal act of bullies who thought they could intimidate a regular citizen. Patricia Wellington chose that exact moment to walk outside to check her mailbox. She stopped dead when she saw the patrol cars, crime scene van, and cluster of uniformed officers in Robert's driveway. Her satisfied smile faded as she realized the vandalism had been reported to police. From across the street, she watched Detective Williams interviewing Robert while Officer Brooks documented evidence and the crime scene technician processed the damaged truck. Patricia assumed Robert was just another victim, filing a police report that would disappear into bureaucratic limbo. What she couldn't hear was Detective Williams' conversation with Robert. "Chief, the video evidence is ironclad. We can arrest all 3 suspects today if you want to press charges." "I definitely want to press charges," Robert replied. "But I want to handle this by the book. No shortcuts, no special treatment. Build the strongest possible case and let the evidence speak for itself." Crime scene technician Martinez was documenting everything with professional thoroughness. She collected paint chips from the scratched areas, photographed the tire damage patterns, and even found fingerprints on the truck's door handle where one of the suspects had steadied themselves while vandalizing. "Chief, whoever did this left us plenty of evidence," Martinez reported. "Between your video footage and the physical evidence, this case is going to be a prosecutor's dream." Detective Williams was reviewing the security footage frame by frame on Robert's laptop, taking detailed notes about each suspect's actions and statements. "Chief, this premeditation conversation is devastating evidence. Wellington can be heard planning the entire attack, assigning roles to each participant and even discussing how to avoid getting caught. This isn't just vandalism, it's conspiracy to commit a felony." Frank Rodriguez approached the group of officers, still feeling guilty about not intervening during the vandalism. "Officers, I witnessed the entire incident from my garage. I can provide testimony about what I saw." Detective Williams took Frank's statement, which corroborated every detail captured on the security cameras. Frank also provided background information about Patricia's pattern of harassment against Robert and other neighbors. "This Wellington woman has been terrorizing residents for years," Frank explained. "She uses HOA rules as weapons to force out anyone who won't submit to her control. What she did to Mr. Chen's truck is just the escalation of weeks of harassment." By now, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, drawn by the police activity. Several approached Detective Williams offering to provide statements about Patricia's behavior patterns and previous incidents. Mrs. Kim stepped forward with a folder full of documents. "Officer, I have copies of all the violation notices Mrs. Wellington sent to Mr. Chen. You can see how unreasonable and harassing they were." The evidence was overwhelming. Video footage of the crime, witness testimony, physical evidence, documentation of prior harassment, and clear proof of financial damages exceeding felony thresholds. Detective Williams closed his notebook and looked at Robert. "Chief, we have enough evidence to arrest all 3 suspects right now. How do you want to handle this?" Patricia was still watching from across the street, growing more nervous as the police investigation continued. She noticed more neighbors talking to the officers and providing documents. For the first time since planning her attack, she began to worry that she might face actual consequences, but she still had no idea that the difficult resident she'd been harassing, and whose property she'd just destroyed, was the chief of police for the entire city. That revelation was about to destroy her world completely. Robert looked across the street at Patricia, who quickly looked away when their eyes met. "Detective Williams, let's go make some arrests." As Detective Williams radioed for additional patrol units to assist with the arrests, Patricia finally understood that her carefully planned lesson for Robert Chen was about to become the biggest mistake of her life. The woman who had spent 8 years terrorizing her neighbors with fake authority was about to discover what real authority looked like. Detective Williams called for backup units to assist with the arrests. Within minutes, 3 additional patrol cars arrived at Willowbrook Estates, their presence turning the normally quiet Saturday afternoon into the neighborhood's biggest event in years. Patricia Wellington watched nervously from her living room window as officers gathered in Robert's driveway. She tried to convince herself that Robert was just filing a routine police report that would go nowhere. In her experience, police rarely followed through on property crime cases, especially when no one was hurt. "They're probably just taking his statement for insurance purposes," she told herself. "By Monday, this will all be forgotten." Detective Williams approached Patricia's front door at exactly 2:47 p.m., accompanied by Officer Brooks and 2 additional officers. Patricia opened the door before he could knock, trying to project confidence and authority. "Officers, what seems to be the problem? I hope you're not here because of Mr. Chen's complaints about our HOA enforcement actions." "Ma'am, I'm Detective Williams with the City Police Department. Are you Patricia Wellington?" "Yes, I'm Patricia Wellington, president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. If this is about that man's truck, I can assure you that all of our actions have been completely within our legal authority." Detective Williams pulled out his notebook and badge. "Mrs. Wellington, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit vandalism, destruction of property, and criminal harassment. You have the right to remain silent." Patricia's face went white as Detective Williams continued reading her Miranda rights. "This is ridiculous. You can't arrest me for enforcing community standards." "Ma'am, we have video evidence of you and 2 accomplices systematically destroying Mr. Chen's vehicle this morning. The damage exceeds $15,000, which makes this a felony." "Video evidence? That's impossible," Patricia stammered, even as Officer Brooks gently turned her around to apply handcuffs. "Mrs. Wellington, we have clear footage from multiple camera angles showing you scratching the victim's truck, coordinating with your accomplices, and discussing the plan beforehand. We also have witness testimony and physical evidence." As Patricia was escorted to the patrol car, neighbors gathered on sidewalks and porches to watch the woman who had terrorized them for years finally face justice. Some looked shocked, others satisfied, but everyone understood they were witnessing the end of Patricia Wellington's reign over their community. Bill Henderson was arrested next. When officers knocked on his door at 318 Elm Street, his wife answered and immediately called for him. Bill appeared at the door wearing the same clothes from the morning's vandalism, still stained with paint thinner. "Mr. Henderson, I'm Detective Williams. You're under arrest for destruction of property and conspiracy charges related to the vandalism of Robert Chen's vehicle this morning." Unlike Patricia, Bill broke down immediately. "I knew this was a bad idea. I told Patricia we shouldn't do it, but she kept pushing and pushing. She said it was for the good of the community." "Sir, anything you say can be used against you in court," Detective Williams reminded him. "You'll have an opportunity to speak with an attorney." Bill's wife started crying as her husband was handcuffed and led away. She'd warned him for years that Patricia Wellington was bad news, but he'd enjoyed being part of her inner circle too much to listen. Carol Murphy's arrest was the most dramatic. When officers arrived at 267 Pine Street, Carol saw them coming and tried to run out her back door. Officer Brooks caught her in her backyard where she was attempting to climb over a fence. Mrs. Murphy, stop running and put your hands where I can see them. Carol collapsed in her flower bed, sobbing hysterically. I didn't want to do it. Patricia made me. She said if I didn't help, she'd find ways to make my life miserable with HOA violations. The 3 suspects were transported to the city jail for booking and processing. News of the arrest spread through Willowbrook Estates faster than wildfire, with neighbors calling and texting each other about Patricia's downfall. But the biggest shock was still to come. At 4:30 p.m., Detective Williams returned to Robert's house to complete his report and collect the security footage for evidence. Several neighbors had gathered to offer support and additional testimony about Patricia's harassment patterns. Frank Rodriguez was describing Patricia's past targeting of other residents when Mrs. Kim interrupted with a question that had been bothering her. Mr. Chen, how did the police respond so quickly to your call? And why did they send so many officers for a vandalism case? Robert looked around at the group of neighbors who had supported him throughout his ordeal with Patricia. These were good people who deserved to know the truth about who had been living among them. Mrs. Kim, there's something I should probably tell all of you, Robert began. My name is Robert Chen and I'm the chief of police for our city. The silence that followed was complete. Frank's mouth fell open. Mrs. Kim's eyes went wide. The other neighbors looked at each other in amazement. You're the police chief? Frank finally asked. Patricia Wellington spent 3 weeks harassing and threatening the chief of police. She had no idea who I was, Robert explained. To her, I was just another resident she could bully into submission. She never asked about my job, and I didn't volunteer the information because I wanted to handle this situation as a private citizen. Mrs. Kim started laughing, not from humor, but from the ironic justice of the situation. That woman spent 8 years making everyone afraid of her fake authority, and she chose to attack the one person with real authority to stop her. Detective Williams shook his head in amazement. Chief, when Patricia Wellington finds out who you really are, she's going to have a complete breakdown. The news of Robert's identity spread through the neighborhood even faster than word of the arrests had. By evening, everyone in Willowbrook Estates knew that Patricia Wellington had vandalized the police chief's truck. The legal consequences came swiftly. The district attorney's office fast-tracked the case due to the overwhelming evidence and the symbolic importance of prosecuting those who targeted law enforcement officers. Even unknowingly, Patricia's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the evidence was too strong and the charges too serious. The security footage made denial impossible, and her accomplices were already cooperating with prosecutors in exchange for reduced sentences. The financial damage assessment revealed that Robert's truck required over $60,000 in repairs and restoration. The deep scratches had damaged the metal underneath, requiring extensive bodywork. The paint thinner had chemically burned through multiple layers, necessitating a complete repaint. The slashed tires were custom models that cost over $800 each to replace. Patricia's insurance company refused to cover the damage, citing criminal acts as excluded from coverage. She was forced to liquidate her retirement accounts and take a second mortgage on her home to pay for Robert's truck repairs and legal damages. The criminal trial lasted only 3 days. Patricia's defense attorney argued that she'd been trying to protect her community's property values, but the judge wasn't sympathetic. Mrs. Wellington, Judge Martinez said during sentencing, you spent weeks harassing an innocent resident, then escalated to destroying his property when he refused to be intimidated. The fact that your victim happened to be a police chief is irrelevant. Your actions would have been equally wrong regardless of his profession. Patricia received 18 months in prison, 3 years probation, and was ordered to pay full restitution plus punitive damages. Bill Henderson got 6 months in probation. Carol Murphy, who cooperated fully with prosecutors and showed genuine remorse, received community service and probation. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and unanimously voted to remove Patricia from all positions. They also voted to compensate Robert for his legal expenses and formally apologized for Patricia's abuse of her authority. Donald Harper, who had refused to participate in the vandalism, was elected as the new HOA president. His first act was to review and eliminate the vague rule, interpretations Patricia had used to harass residents. This association will focus on legitimate community maintenance and reasonable rule enforcement, Harper announced. The days of using HOA authority to bully our neighbors are over. 6 months later, Robert's truck looked better than new. The insurance settlement and legal damages had paid for premium restoration work that left it in show-car condition. More importantly, Willowbrook Estates had transformed from a community ruled by fear into an actual neighborhood where people looked out for each other. Frank Rodriguez organized monthly barbecues where residents could discuss community issues openly. Mrs. Kim started a neighborhood watch program that focused on actual safety rather than HOA violations. The playground that Patricia had tried to ban was finally built, giving local children a place to play safely. Robert kept his job as police chief, but his experience with Patricia Wellington influenced how his department handled HOA disputes and harassment complaints. He implemented new training programs to help officers recognize patterns of systematic harassment and abuse of authority. Patricia Wellington served her full sentence and was released on probation. She moved to a different state, where she rented a small apartment and worked as a retail clerk. Her days of wielding power over others were finished forever. The case became legendary within law enforcement circles, as an example of how bullies eventually target the wrong victim. Academy instructors used it to teach new officers about the importance of treating every citizen's complaint seriously, because you never know who might be calling for help. Robert still drives his restored truck to work every day, and it remains the nicest vehicle in the Willowbrook Estates neighborhood. No one has ever filed an HOA complaint about it. After all, nobody wants to mess with the police chief's truck.